The rushing waters of the Owens River had turned merciless under the spring melt of 1878, and Flynn Quentin barely had time to drop his horse's reins before he dove headlong into the churning current after the flailing figure being swept downstream. Flynn had been riding the dusty trail into Panamint, California, after 3 weeks of driving cattle from Sacramento, his mind on nothing but a hot meal and a soft bed, when he heard the scream. The sound cut through the afternoon air like a knife, and his body moved on instinct. The woman in the water was fighting against the rapids, her yellow dress billowing around her like a terrible sail dragging her under. Flynn was a strong swimmer, having grown up along the Colorado River before his family moved west, but even he struggled against the violent currents swollen with snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada mountains. His fingers caught fabric first, then an arm, and he pulled hard, wrapping his other arm around her waist as he kicked toward the muddy bank. The water fought him for every inch, filling his boots and dragging at his legs. His lungs burned and his muscles screamed, but he refused to let go. They tumbled over rocks and through eddies until finally, mercifully, his boots found purchase on the river bottom. He hauled them both onto the shore, collapsing beside her in the mud and grass. She was not breathing. Flynn rolled her onto her side, pounding her back with the heel of his hand, the way his father had taught him years ago. Water poured from her mouth, and she coughed violently, her whole body convulsing with the effort to expel the river from her lungs. He kept his hand on her shoulder, steadying her, murmuring words he would not remember later. When her breathing finally evened out into ragged gasps, he helped her roll onto her back. That was when she opened her eyes. They were the color of new grass after rain, vibrant green with flecks of gold, and they looked up at him with such startling clarity that Flynn felt something shift deep in his chest. For 32 years he had wandered from town to town, ranch to ranch, never putting down roots, never finding a reason to stay anywhere longer than a season. He had been alone so long he had forgotten what it felt like to want anything beyond the next sunrise and the next day's wages. But in that moment, looking into those eyes while she struggled to draw breath, Flynn Quentin knew with absolute certainty that his lonely days were finally over. "You are safe now," he managed to say, his voice rough. "I have got you." She tried to speak, but could only cough again, her body shaking with cold and shock. Flynn stripped off his drenched leather jacket and laid it over her, though it provided little warmth. Her lips were turning blue, and he knew he needed to get her somewhere dry and warm quickly. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. "Nora," she whispered, her teeth chattering so hard he almost missed it. "Nora Brennan." "Nora, all right, Nora, I am Flynn. We need to get you to town." "Can you ride?" She nodded weakly, though he doubted she could sit upright in her condition. His horse, a steady bay gelding named Copper, had wandered only a few yards away and stood grazing as if nothing remarkable had happened. Flynn scooped Nora up in his arms, surprised by how light she was, and lifted her onto Copper's back. He swung up behind her, wrapping one arm securely around her waist to keep her upright against his chest. She sagged against him, still trembling. "What were you doing out there?" Flynn asked as he urged Copper into an easy walk toward Panamint. The town was only 2 miles distant, visible as a smudge of buildings against the harsh desert landscape that surrounded this rare strip of river valley. "The wagon," Nora said faintly. "The wheel broke. I was trying to reach the bank, but the current took me." "My father," she struggled to sit up, panic flaring in her voice. "My father was with me. Did you see him?" Flynn felt his stomach drop. "I only saw you. Where did you go into the water?" "Maybe half a mile up. Near the big cottonwood trees. Please, he cannot swim well. His leg was injured in the war." Flynn turned Copper around immediately, his mind racing. Every second counted in water that cold and violent, but he had to get Nora to safety first, or she would die from exposure. The town had a doctor, or at least someone who passed for one in these parts. "I am taking you to Panamint first, then I will go back for your father. Do you understand? You will not survive if I do not get you warm." He felt her nod against his chest, but he could also feel her silent tears soaking into his shirt. The ride into town felt like it took hours, though it could not have been more than 20 minutes. Panamint was one of those rough mining towns that had sprung up in the desert like a weed, all sun-bleached wood and canvas tents, built on dreams of silver and sustained by desperation. Flynn rode straight to the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, a practical woman who asked no questions when he carried the soaking, shivering girl through her door. "Get her into dry clothes and warm blankets," Flynn said, laying Nora on a settee in the parlor. "Her father is still in the river. I am going back." Mrs. Chen nodded crisply, already moving toward her linen cupboard. Nora caught Flynn's hand as he turned to leave, her fingers ice cold against his. "Please find him," she whispered. "Please." "I will do everything I can," Flynn promised, though they both knew what the odds were. He squeezed her hand once and then he was out the door, back on Copper, riding hard upstream. He searched until the sun began to set, walking both banks, checking every snag and eddy. Other men from town joined him when word spread, combing the river with grim faces. They found the wagon where it had tipped into the water, one wheel indeed broken clean off, the current pinning it against the rocks. They found a man's hat and a leather bag containing papers that confirmed the name Brennan. But they did not find Nora's father. As darkness fell, the sheriff, a grizzled man named Dawson, called off the search. "We will try again at first light," he said, placing a hand on Flynn's shoulder. "Cannot do any more tonight. River might give him up downstream by morning." Flynn knew he was right, but the knowledge sat bitter in his mouth. He rode back to Panamint exhausted, his clothes finally dried to his skin but crusted with river mud. At the boarding house, Mrs. Chen met him at the door. "The girl is sleeping," she said quietly. "I gave her some tea and got her warm. Dr. Morgan came by and said she will be fine, just needs rest. She asked about her father before she dozed off. We did not find him." Mrs. Chen's face grew somber. "I thought as much. Poor child. She told me they were heading here from Sacramento. Her father had bought a plot of land outside town, was going to start a farm. Just the two of them." Flynn felt the weight of that information settle over him. Nora was alone now, stranded in a town where she knew no one, with nothing but whatever belongings might be salvaged from that wagon. "Which room is she in?" he asked. "Second floor, third door on the right. But let her sleep, Mr. Quentin. There will be time enough for bad news in the morning." Flynn nodded and went to his own room, but sleep would not come. He kept seeing those green eyes looking up at him, kept feeling the certainty that had struck him on the riverbank. He had saved her life, and somehow in doing so, she had awakened something in him he had not known was sleeping. It made no sense. He did not believe in love at first sight, had always thought such notions were for dime novels and foolish young people. At 32, he was neither young nor foolish, and yet here he lay, unable to think of anything but a woman whose name he had learned only hours ago. When dawn finally broke, Flynn was already dressed and heading out the door. The search party reassembled, and they walked the river for another 5 miles downstream. It was one of the miners, a Cornishman named Trelawney, who spotted the body caught in the branches of a fallen tree where the river widened and slowed. They pulled him out reverently, wrapped him in canvas, and loaded him onto a wagon. Flynn volunteered to be the one to tell Nora. He found her in the parlor of the boarding house, dressed in a borrowed calico dress that was too big for her frame, her chestnut hair hanging in a long braid over one shoulder. She looked up when he entered, and he saw hope flash in her eyes before his expression told her what she needed to know. The hope died, replaced by a grief so profound that Flynn ached to see it. "We found him this morning," Flynn said gently, sitting down across from her. "I am so sorry, Nora." She nodded slowly, her hands folding and unfolding in her lap. "I knew," she whispered. "I knew when you came back last night without him, but I still hoped he did not suffer. The river was quick. It was a lie, the kind you told the bereaved because the truth helped no one, and Nora likely knew it for what it was. But she accepted it with another nod, her eyes distant. "What will I do?" The question seemed directed more at herself than at Flynn. "We spent everything we had on that land. I have nowhere to go, no family left. My mother died 2 years ago. It was just us." "You will stay here," Flynn heard himself say. "Mrs. Chen has rooms and there is work in Panamint. You could teach school maybe. Can you read and write?" "Yes. My mother was a teacher before she married. She educated me well." Nora finally looked at him directly, really looked at him for the first time since he had walked in. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. You could have ridden on yesterday and none of this would be your concern." Flynn did not have a good answer for that, or rather, he had an answer he could not speak aloud. Instead he said, "I could not let you drown. And now that I pulled you out, I figure I ought to see the job through and make sure you land on your feet." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Like a stray cat you fished from a well," something like that. They buried her father the next day in the small cemetery at the edge of town, a windswept patch of ground where the desert was already trying to reclaim the wooden crosses. The preacher was a traveling man who happened to be passing through, and he said words over the grave that Nora seemed not to hear. Flynn stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and when she swayed slightly, he offered his arm. She took it, gripping hard, and did not let go until the last shovel of earth had been laid. In the days that followed, Nora stayed at the boarding house and Flynn found reasons to linger in Panamint rather than moving on to the next job. He told himself he was just making sure she would be all right, but the truth was he could not bring himself to leave. Every morning he woke thinking about her, and every night he fell asleep the same way. He helped salvage what could be saved from the wagon, some clothes, a few books, a music box that had belonged to her mother. He sold the broken wagon for parts and gave her the money. He made inquiries about the land her father had purchased and learned it was good fertile ground near the river, rare and valuable in this desert country. "You should keep it," Flynn told her one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sun paint the mountains red. "Once you get settled, you could hire someone to work it, take a share of the crops." "I do not know anything about running a farm," Nora said. She had been quiet since the funeral, understandably, but tonight there was something else in her voice, a question she was working up the courage to ask. "Flynn, why are you still here? I know you were just passing through when you found me. Do you not have somewhere to be?" Flynn leaned back against the porch rail, studying her in the fading light. She was beautiful, he had realized that from the first moment, but it was more than that. There was a strength in her, a resilience that had survived tragedy and come out the other side still standing. She was kind, intelligent, and possessed of a dry wit that caught him by surprise when she let it show. She was everything he had not known he was looking for all these years. "I do not have anywhere I need to be," he said carefully. "I am a drifter, Nora. I go where the work takes me, but lately I have been thinking maybe it is time to stop drifting." She turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. "Here, in Panamint, maybe. There is opportunity here if a man is willing to work, and there are other reasons to stay." "What reasons?" Flynn felt his heart hammering against his ribs. They had known each other less than 2 weeks. She was grieving and vulnerable. He should wait, should give her time, should be sensible about this. But when had anything about this situation been sensible? From the moment he had pulled her from that river, sense had flown out the window. "You," he said simply. "You are the reason, Nora." She drew in a sharp breath. "Flynn, I do not think, I know it is too soon," he interrupted. "I know you barely know me and you have just lost your father. I am not asking you for anything. I just need you to know why I am staying. When I pulled you out of that water and you opened your eyes, something changed in me. I have been alone my whole adult life, never staying anywhere long enough to build anything real. But when I saw you, I knew. I knew my lonely days were over, whether you feel the same or not. So I am staying in Panamint, and I am going to court you proper if you will let me, and I am going to prove to you that I am a man worth trusting your future to." Nora stared at him, her expression unreadable in the dusk. Then, to his surprise, tears began to slide down her cheeks. "I am broken right now," she whispered. "Everything hurts and I do not know which way is up anymore, but when you are near me, it hurts a little less. I do not know if that is fair to you to need you this way." Flynn reached out slowly and took her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She did not. "It is fair," he said. "Let me be what you need, Nora. We will figure out the rest as we go." She nodded, squeezing his hand, and they sat together in the gathering darkness while the stars began to emerge overhead like scattered diamonds. True to his word, Flynn found work in Panamint. The mining company needed men who knew their way around horses and cattle, and Flynn hired on as a freighter, hauling ore and supplies between the mines and the town. It was hard work but honest, and it paid well enough that he could afford a room at the boarding house and still put money aside. More importantly, it kept him close to Nora. He courted her the old-fashioned way, the way his father had courted his mother back in Missouri. He brought her wildflowers from the desert, tough little blooms that somehow thrived in the brutal heat. He sat with her in the parlor in the evenings, reading aloud from her books or just talking about everything and nothing. He walked her to the general store when she needed supplies, carrying her parcels and making her laugh with stories from his years on the trail. He was patient and respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Slowly, gradually, Nora began to heal. The raw grief in her eyes faded to a quieter sadness, and then even that began to lift. She smiled more often, laughed more easily. She started helping Mrs. Chen around the boarding house, earning her keep and learning the rhythms of the town. She made friends with Sarah Walsh, the blacksmith's wife, and with Martha Gonzalez, who ran the cantina. She talked about maybe starting that school, teaching the miners' children their letters, and she fell in love with Flynn Quentin. She did not mean to, had not planned on it, but how could she not? He was steady and strong, gentle and patient. He made her feel safe in a world that had suddenly become terrifying. More than that, he made her feel seen. He listened when she talked about her mother's lessons or her dreams for the future. He asked her opinion on things and actually cared about her answers. He looked at her like she was the only woman in the world, and after a lifetime of being ordinary, that attention was intoxicating. 2 months after the drowning, on a warm evening in July, they were walking along the river, the place that had brought them together and taken so much from Nora. She had avoided it at first, but Flynn had gently encouraged her to face it, to reclaim it as something other than the site of tragedy. "The river is not evil," he had said. "It just is. It gives life and takes it like everything in nature. You cannot let fear of it rule you." So they walked the bank together as the sun set, and Nora found he was right. The river was beautiful here, flowing clear and cool through the desert, lined with cottonwoods that rustled in the breeze. Birds sang in the branches and fish jumped after insects. It was peaceful. "Flynn," Nora said, stopping to watch the water flow past. "I need to tell you something." He turned to her, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I love you." The words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for so long that they burst forth all at once. "I know it has not been very long, and maybe I should wait longer to be sure, but I am sure. When I nearly died in this river, I thought I had lost everything. But then I opened my eyes and you were there, and you have been there every day since. You saved my life, and then you stayed to help me rebuild it. How could I not love you?" Flynn felt like the sun had risen inside his chest. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "Nora Brennan, I have loved you from that first moment," he said fiercely, "and I will love you until the day I die. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she breathed, and then she was in his arms and he was kissing her for the first time, soft and sweet and full of promise. The river flowed on beside them, indifferent to their joy, but they paid it no mind. They had found each other against all odds, and that was enough. They were married a month later in a ceremony at the boarding house, with half of Panamint in attendance. Mrs. Chen wept openly, claiming she had known from the first day that this would happen. Sarah Walsh stood up with Nora as her matron of honor, and the blacksmith, Tom Walsh, stood with Flynn. The traveling preacher happened to be back in town and performed the service, his voice booming out the words that bound them together. Flynn had used most of his savings to buy a simple gold ring, and when he slipped it onto Nora's finger, his hand shook. She was so beautiful in her white dress, borrowed from Martha Gonzalez and altered to fit. Her eyes shone with happiness and something deeper, a contentment that came from knowing she was home at last. "I love you, Mrs. Quentin," Flynn whispered as they sealed their vows with a kiss. "I love you, Mr. Quentin," Nora whispered back, and the gathered crowd erupted in cheers. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy but solid and clean, with 2 rooms and a porch that looked out toward the mountains. Flynn continued his work with the mining company while Nora finally opened her school, teaching a dozen children in a converted storage room behind the general store. The work was hard for both of them, the desert unforgiving and the town rough around the edges, but they were happy. They were building something together, a life and a future. At night, they would lie in their bed and talk about their dreams. Flynn wanted to save enough to buy some land, maybe run a few head of cattle. Nora wanted to expand the school, maybe build a real schoolhouse someday. They wanted children of their own, a family to fill the house with noise and laughter. "How many children do you want?" Nora asked one night, her head pillowed on Flynn's chest. "As many as you will give me," he answered, running his fingers through her hair. 2, 10 does not matter. As long as they have you for a mother, they will be blessed." "I hope they have your strength," Nora said softly. "Your courage. You jumped into that river without hesitation, risking your life for a stranger. That is who I want our children to be." "They will be perfect because they will be half you and half me," Flynn said. "But no pressure on that front. I am happy with just you for as long as it takes." As it happened, it did not take long. By Christmas, Nora was pregnant with their first child. The pregnancy was not easy in the harsh desert climate, the heat brutal even in winter, but Nora weathered it with the same strength she had shown in everything else. Flynn fussed over her constantly, driving her to distraction with his concern, but she loved him for it. "I am not made of glass," she protested one evening when he tried to carry her up the porch steps, even though she was perfectly capable of walking. "You are carrying the most precious cargo in the world," Flynn replied stubbornly. "Let me take care of you." How could she argue with that? Their son was born in early summer of 1879, during a thunderstorm that rolled down from the mountains and broke the heat for a blessed few hours. Flynn paced the porch while Sarah Walsh attended the birth, his heart in his throat every time he heard Nora cry out. When Sarah finally emerged with a squalling bundle, Flynn nearly fell over in relief. "You have a son," Sarah announced, grinning, "and your wife is asking for you." Flynn rushed inside to find Nora exhausted but radiant, holding their baby against her chest. The infant had stopped crying and was making small, snuffling sounds, his tiny fist wrapped around Nora's finger. "Look at him," Nora whispered. "He is perfect." Flynn sat carefully on the edge of the bed, afraid to jostle her, and looked down at his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and his face was red and wrinkled, and Flynn thought he was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen aside from his mother. "What should we name him?" Flynn asked. "I was thinking Thomas, after my father," Nora said, "if that is all right with you." Flynn felt his throat tighten. "Thomas Quentin. I think that is perfect." They called him Tommy, and he grew strong and healthy despite the harsh environment. Flynn proved to be a devoted father, patient and gentle with his son. He would carry Tommy around the house, showing him things and talking to him as if the infant could understand every word. Nora would watch them together and feel her heart swell with love for both of them. Life in Panamint continued to be challenging. The mines were starting to play out, some of the smaller operations closing down, and there was talk that the town might not last much longer. Flynn began to worry about their future, about what would happen if the work dried up. He and Nora had saved some money, but not enough to start over somewhere else. Then Flynn remembered the land that Nora's father had purchased, the plot near the river that had sat unused all this time. One evening after Tommy was asleep, he brought it up. "What if we used that land?" he said. "Built a real farm there, grew crops and raised some animals. It would be hard work, but we could make it work. Build something lasting." Nora considered this, rocking slowly in the chair Flynn had made for her. "It would mean leaving town," she said. "The school, our friends. We would only be a few miles away. And Nora, if Panamint dies like everyone says it will, we need somewhere to go. Your father chose that land for a reason. He saw the potential there." "He did," Nora agreed quietly. She was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, let us do it. Let us build the farm my father dreamed of." It took them a year to make the transition. Flynn worked every spare moment building a house on the land, a real house with 3 rooms and glass windows and a stone fireplace. Other men from town helped when they could, partly because they liked Flynn and Nora, and partly because they admired the determination it took to stake a claim on the future when the present was so uncertain. The house rose slowly from the desert, timber and stone and sweat, until finally it stood complete beside the river where Nora had nearly died. It felt like coming full circle, reclaiming that place and making it their own. They moved in during the spring of 1881, when Tommy was nearly 2 years old and already toddling around getting into everything. Flynn planted crops, wheat and corn and vegetables, watering them from the river, using a system of channels he dug by hand. He bought chickens and a milk cow, then eventually a few head of cattle. Nora kept the house and tended a garden, still teaching a few children who lived on nearby farms. It was grueling work, up before dawn and not stopping until after dark, but it was theirs. They were building something that would last, and they were happy. Perhaps happier than they had been in town, because out here they had space to breathe, to be themselves without the constant press of other people. Tommy thrived in the open air, growing brown and strong from the sun. At night the 3 of them would sit on the porch and watch the stars emerge, Flynn pointing out constellations and telling stories while Tommy listened with rapt attention, and Nora leaned against her husband's shoulder. "This is what I always wanted," Flynn said one such night, his voice soft. "I just did not know it until I pulled you out of that river." "We are lucky," Nora agreed. "So many people search their whole lives for this and never find it. I almost did not find it. If I had taken a different trail that day, if I had been an hour earlier or later, I would have missed you entirely. We would have lived our whole lives never knowing the other existed." Nora shivered despite the warm night. "I do not want to think about that. You were there when I needed you. That is all that matters." In 1883, Nora became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she was stronger now, toughened by the farm work, or perhaps because she knew what to expect. Either way, she carried on with her normal routine until the very last weeks, refusing to be coddled. Their second child, a daughter, was born in October during the harvest. Flynn had been in the fields when Nora's labor started, and by the time he got back to the house, Sarah Walsh was already there and the baby was nearly arrived. He made it just in time to hear his daughter's first cry, a lusty wail that announced her arrival to the world. "You have a daughter," Sarah told him, laughing at his wind-blown, panicked appearance. "And she has excellent lungs." Flynn rushed to Nora's side and found her laughing too, tired but triumphant, holding a red-faced baby who was indeed making her displeasure known at having been evicted from her warm cocoon. "She is fierce," Nora said. "I think we should name her Rose after your mother." Flynn had told her stories about his mother, a pioneer woman who had crossed the plains in a wagon train and raised 6 children in a sod house. She had died when Flynn was 15, and he still missed her. "Rose Quentin," he said, his voice thick. "Ma would have loved that." Rose proved to be every bit as fierce as her first moments suggested. She was a colicky baby who rarely slept and always wanted to be held, driving Nora to exhaustion. But she was also bright and alert, watching everything with sharp blue eyes. Tommy was fascinated by his little sister and wanted to help with everything, which was alternately adorable and exasperating. The years passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. The farm prospered, Flynn's careful management and Nora's frugality allowing them to expand gradually. They added more cattle, more land, hired a hand to help with the heavy work. Tommy grew into a serious boy who loved the animals and spent hours following Flynn around, learning everything his father could teach him. Rose grew into a wild child who climbed trees and chased chickens and gave her mother gray hairs with her daring. Panamint, as predicted, largely died. The mines closed one by one, and families moved away seeking opportunity elsewhere. But some stayed, the ones who had put down real roots, and the town shrank but did not disappear entirely. Mrs. Chen kept the boarding house open for travelers. The Walshes kept their blacksmith shop. Martha Gonzalez kept the cantina. And the school that Nora had started continued. Now in a small building the remaining families had built together, with Nora teaching there 3 days a week. In 1887, when Tommy was 8 and Rose was 4, Nora found herself pregnant once more. This one came as a surprise, as they had thought their family complete, but it was a welcome surprise nonetheless. Flynn was delighted at the prospect of another child, and the children were excited about a new sibling. "I hope it is a boy," Tommy said. "Rose needs someone to balance her out." "I hope it is a girl," Rose countered. "Then we can outnumber the boys." As it turned out, they both got their wish in a way. Nora gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, in the spring of 1888. The delivery was long and difficult, and there was a moment when Flynn feared he might lose her, but Nora fought her way through with characteristic strength. When it was over, and she lay exhausted with an infant in each arm, Flynn knelt beside the bed and wept with relief and joy. "We have an even number now," Nora said weakly, managing a smile. "2 boys, 2 girls." They named the twins Henry and Hope, and their arrival brought a new energy to the household. Tommy and Rose took their roles as older siblings seriously, helping care for the babies with surprising competence. The house was never quiet anymore, always filled with the sound of children laughing or crying or playing, and Flynn and Nora would look at each other over the chaos and grin. "Remember when it was just us?" Flynn said one particularly hectic evening, when both twins were teething and Rose had somehow gotten into the chicken coop, and Tommy was trying to explain how he had accidentally let one of the calves out of the pen. "Vaguely," Nora replied, bouncing Hope on her hip while trying to stir dinner with her free hand. "I think it was quiet. Boring," Flynn declared, taking Hope from her so she could focus on cooking. "This is much better." And it was. It was chaotic and exhausting and sometimes overwhelming, but it was everything they had dreamed of and more. They were a family, bound together by love and hard work, and the knowledge that they had built something real and lasting. The farm continued to prosper through the late 1880s and into the 90s. Flynn's reputation as an honest, hard-working man spread, and he was able to sell his cattle and crops for good prices. They added more rooms to the house as the children grew, expanding it into a sprawling structure that bore little resemblance to the simple cabin Flynn had first built. They bought more land, absorbing abandoned plots from families who had left the area, until their holdings stretched for miles along the river. Tommy grew into a tall, serious young man who shared his father's steady nature and his mother's intelligence. He loved the farm and made it clear he wanted to stay and work it when he was grown. Rose grew into a beautiful, spirited girl who wanted to see the world beyond Panamint, but loved her family too much to stray far. Henry and Hope were inseparable, their twin bond strong, and they brought laughter wherever they went. Flynn and Nora aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. Flynn's hair went gray at the temples and lines appeared around his eyes, but Nora thought he only grew more handsome. Nora's face showed the marks of sun and wind and laughter, but Flynn still saw the beautiful woman he had pulled from the river all those years ago. On their 15th wedding anniversary, in August of 1894, they left the children with Sarah Walsh and rode out to the riverbank where they had first confessed their love. It was a warm evening, the desert cooling as the sun set, and they sat together on the grass watching the water flow past. "Do you ever think about that day?" Nora asked, leaning against Flynn's side. "When I went into the river, all the time," Flynn admitted. "I think about how easily it could have gone differently. If I had been looking the other way, if I had been a worse swimmer, if the current had been just a bit stronger. But it did not go differently. You saved me." Nora tilted her face up to look at him. "And then you stayed. That is the part that still amazes me. You could have made sure I was safe and ridden on, but you stayed." "Why?" Flynn thought about that, trying to find the right words for something he had always just felt in his bones. "Because when you opened your eyes and looked at me, I knew," he said finally. "I knew you were the reason I had been wandering all those years. I was not lost, I was just looking for you. And once I found you, there was no reason to go anywhere else." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. Even after 15 years, he could still move her with his words. "I knew too," she whispered. "Not right away because I was so scared and grieving. But soon. I knew you were special, that what we had was special. And I was right." They kissed as the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss on this very spot so many years ago. The river flowed on beside them, eternal and indifferent, but they were grateful to it now. It had tested them and nearly broken them, but in the end, it had brought them together. As the 1890s wore on, the children continued to grow and the farm continued to thrive. Tommy, at 16, was already working full days alongside his father and proving himself a capable rancher. Rose, at 12, had discovered a talent for drawing and spent her free time sketching the desert landscape and the animals on the farm. Henry and Hope, at 7, were attending school in what remained of Panamint and showing signs of academic excellence that made Nora proud. Flynn and Nora settled into the rhythms of middle age, comfortable with each other in a way that only decades of partnership could bring. They rarely fought, and when they did, they made up quickly, having learned long ago that life was too short and too precious to waste on anger. They worked side by side every day, and at night they fell into bed exhausted and content, often too tired for words but always finding a moment to reach for each other, to confirm that they were still there, still together. In the spring of 1897, when Tommy turned 18, he announced his intention to marry Sarah and Tom Walsh's daughter, Emma. Flynn and Nora were not surprised, having watched the courtship develop over the past year, and they gave their blessing gladly. Emma was a sweet, practical girl who would make a good wife and partner for their son. The wedding was held at the farm, with the whole remaining community of Panamint in attendance. It was a joyous occasion, full of music and dancing and feasting. Flynn watched his son pledge his vows to Emma and felt the circle of life continuing, the next generation stepping up to take their place. Nora cried, as mothers do, but her tears were happy ones. "They will build a good life together," Flynn said, wrapping an arm around his wife as they watched Tommy and Emma dance. "They will," Nora agreed, "just like we did." Tommy and Emma moved into a small house Flynn had built for them on the far side of the property, close enough to help with the farm but far enough to have privacy. Within a year, they had made Flynn and Nora grandparents, a boy they named after Flynn. Holding his grandson for the first time, Flynn felt overwhelmed by emotion, by the miraculous chain of events that had led to this moment. "If I had not jumped into that river," he said to Nora that night, "this baby would not exist. Tommy would not exist. None of our children would exist." "But you did jump," Nora reminded him gently. "That is who you are, Flynn. You see someone in trouble and you help. That is why I love you." As the new century approached, the Quentin farm had become one of the most successful operations in the region. Where Panamint had nearly died, the farms along the river had survived and even thrived, creating a new kind of community based on agriculture rather than mining. Flynn had become a respected elder, someone younger farmers came to for advice, and Nora's school had produced a generation of educated children who were now adults making their way in the world. Rose, now 16, announced that she wanted to go to San Francisco to study art. It was the first time one of their children had expressed a desire to leave, and while it pained Nora to think of her daughter so far away, she understood the need to chase dreams. She and Flynn agreed to send Rose, with the understanding that she would come home for visits. "I will come back," Rose promised her parents as she prepared to leave. "This will always be home, but I need to see what else is out there." "I know," Flynn said, embracing his daughter. "Your mother and I both traveled far from where we started. We understand. Just promise me you will be careful." "I promise." Rose left for San Francisco in the fall of 1898, and the house felt emptier without her vibrant presence. But she wrote letters faithfully, telling them about the city and her studies and the amazing things she was learning. And she kept her promise, coming home for Christmas and spending the whole summer with them. Henry and Hope, at 11, were inseparable and showing signs of being exceptional students. Nora tutored them herself when they were not at school, pushing them academically in a way she had not pushed the older children. Both showed an aptitude for mathematics and science that fascinated and delighted her. They could go to university, Nora said to Flynn one evening. Both of them. They are smart enough. That is years away yet, Flynn replied. But if that is what they want, we will find a way. The turn of the century came on January 1st, 1900, and the Quentins celebrated quietly at home, all of them together. Rose had come back from San Francisco for the holidays. Tommy and Emma brought the baby, and the whole family gathered around the table for dinner. They talked about the past and the future, about how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. 22 years ago, your mother nearly drowned in that river, Flynn said, raising his glass. And I pulled her out. Best decision I ever made. Second best, Nora corrected, raising her own glass. The best decision was staying. They toasted to the new century, to family, to the future. Outside, the desert night was cold and clear, stars blazing overhead in countless numbers. The river flowed on in the darkness, its sound a constant presence that had been the soundtrack to their lives together. As the years of the new century unfolded, the Quentin family continued to grow and change. Tommy and Emma had 2 more children, giving Flynn and Nora 3 grandchildren to dote on. Rose returned from San Francisco with a degree in fine arts and opened a small studio in what remained of Panamint, teaching art and selling her paintings to tourists who passed through on their way to other places. Henry and Hope both won scholarships to attend the University of California, the first in the family to go to college, and Nora wept with pride when they left for Berkeley in 1905. Flynn was 60 by then, his body marked by decades of hard physical labor, but he was still strong and vital. He had started turning over more of the farm's daily management to Tommy, content to work at an easier pace and spend more time with Nora. They took long walks in the evenings, revisiting all their favorite spots, talking about their life and their children and all the unexpected blessings that had come their way. I am proud of them, Flynn said one evening as they walked along the river. All of them. They have turned out well. Because of you, Nora said. You have been such a good father, Flynn, patient and kind and always there when they needed you. We did it together, Flynn corrected. Everything we have, we built together. In 1908, tragedy struck when Tom Walsh died suddenly of a heart attack. His death hit the community hard, as Tom had been one of the founding members of what remained of Panamint, but it hit Flynn especially hard. Tom had been one of his first friends in town, had stood up at his wedding, had been a constant presence in his life for 30 years. At the funeral, Flynn stood beside Sarah Walsh, offering what comfort he could. Tom was a good man, he said, one of the best I ever knew. He thought the same of you, Sarah replied, her eyes red from crying. He used to say that you and Nora were proof that good things happen to good people. The words stayed with Flynn long after the funeral. Good things happen to good people. He supposed it was true in his case. He had tried to live an honest, decent life, had worked hard and treated people fairly, and he had been rewarded beyond measure. He had Nora, the love of his life, still beautiful to him even as age silvered her hair and lined her face. He had 4 wonderful children who had grown into good adults. He had grandchildren, a successful farm, the respect of his community. He had everything he could have wanted. But more than any of that, he had love. The deep, abiding love that came from sharing a life with someone, from weathering storms together and celebrating victories together, from building something that lasted. Henry and Hope graduated from university in 1909, and both returned to the area, though not to the farm. Henry became a teacher in San Bernardino, while Hope married a young engineer and moved to Los Angeles. Rose married a fellow artist and opened a gallery in town. Tommy continued to run the farm with Emma, and their children were already showing signs of wanting to follow in their footsteps. Flynn and Nora, now in their 60s, settled into a peaceful retirement. They still lived on the farm, in the house Flynn had built with his own hands 40 years ago, but they no longer worked the land directly. That was Tommy's job now, and he was doing it well. Flynn and Nora spent their days in quieter pursuits, reading, visiting with grandchildren, maintaining the garden, taking those long evening walks they both loved. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, their children threw them a grand celebration at the farm. Nearly everyone from the region came, over 100 people crowding into the yard to honor the couple who had become something of a legend in the area. The story of how Flynn had saved Nora from drowning and how they had fallen in love had been told and retold so many times it had taken on the quality of a fairy tale, but it was true. Every word of it. Speeches were made, toasts were offered, and Flynn and Nora stood together, hand in hand, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and respect. When it was Flynn's turn to speak, he kept it simple. 30 years ago, I married the woman I pulled from that river, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. And not a single day since then have I regretted it. She has been my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. I am the luckiest man alive. Nora, standing beside him, felt tears streaming down her face. And I am the luckiest woman, she said. Flynn saved my life that day, but he did more than that. He gave me a reason to live it. He gave me a family, a home, a future I never could have imagined. I love him more today than I did 30 years ago, and I will love him until my last breath. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, and Flynn kissed his wife to the delight of everyone present. It was a perfect moment, one they would both treasure in the years to come. Those years passed gently. Flynn and Nora grew older, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts still sharp. They watched their grandchildren grow, took pride in their children's accomplishments, and continued to enjoy the simple pleasures of their life together. The farm remained productive under Tommy's management, ensuring the family's financial security for generations to come. In the spring of 1915, on a warm afternoon, Flynn and Nora took their customary walk down to the river. They moved more slowly now, Flynn using a cane and Nora leaning on his arm, but they still made the journey almost every day. It was their place, the spot where their story had begun and where they had celebrated so many milestones. They sat on the bank, watching the water flow past just as it had for thousands of years before them and would for thousands of years after. Flynn was 70 years old now, Nora 62, and they had been married for 36 years. "Do you remember what you said to me the first time we came here after I got out of the boarding house?" Nora asked. "I said a lot of things," Flynn replied with a smile, "most of them probably foolish." "You said your lonely days were over," Nora reminded him. "That when you pulled me from the water and I opened my eyes, you knew." "I did know," Flynn confirmed, "and I was right. I have not been lonely a single day since." "Neither have I." Nora leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture as natural now as breathing. "We have been blessed, Flynn." "We have." They sat in companionable silence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The desert landscape stretched out around them, harsh but beautiful, the land they had made their own through decades of hard work and determination. "I want to be buried here," Nora said suddenly. "When my time comes, right here by the river." Flynn felt his throat tighten but nodded. "Then we will be buried here together, you and me side by side where our story began, "I like that," Nora said softly. They sat until the stars came out, then slowly made their way back to the house where their family waited. Tommy helped his father up the porch steps while Emma guided Nora, and their grandchildren swarmed around them with questions and hugs. Inside, the house was warm and bright and full of life, 3 generations sharing space and love and laughter. That night, lying in bed beside Flynn, Nora thought about the long, improbable journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost so much that day in the river: her father, her old life, her innocence. But she had gained so much more. She had gained Flynn, solid and dependable and loving. She had gained 4 beautiful children and a growing brood of grandchildren. She had gained a home, a community, a purpose. She had gained a love story that would outlive them both, passed down through the generations as an example of what was possible when 2 people truly committed to each other. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Flynn whispered back, his hand finding hers beneath the covers and squeezing gently. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, hearts beating in rhythm, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life worth living. The years continued to pass. Flynn made it to 75, then 80, defying the odds for a man who had lived such a physically demanding life. Nora remained by his side through it all, her health generally good despite the challenges of aging. They became the patriarchs and matriarchs of a sprawling family that now included great-grandchildren, tiny babies who bore their names and features, and would carry their legacy forward. In the summer of 1920, when Flynn was 83 and Nora was 67, they celebrated their 41st wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the 2 of them. Their children had offered to throw another big party, but Flynn and Nora had declined. They wanted this milestone to be intimate, a moment shared between just the 2 of them. 41 years, Nora marveled as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the familiar desert sunset. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. "Both," Flynn agreed. "We have lived several lifetimes together, Nora, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made us who we are." Nora smiled and took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not pulled me from that river?" "No," Flynn said without hesitation, "because that life is not worth thinking about. This is the only life I want, the only one that matters. You are the only one that matters." "You are a romantic, Flynn Quentin," Nora teased gently. "Only for you." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. The river murmured its eternal song in the distance, and somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear Tommy and his family moving about, the sounds of life continuing. It was perfect, this moment, this life they had built together. Flynn passed away in his sleep 2 years later in the winter of 1922, at the age of 85. He simply did not wake up one morning, his heart having finally given out after more than 8 decades of faithful service. Nora found him lying peacefully in their bed, and though her grief was profound, she took comfort in knowing he had not suffered, had simply slipped away quietly in the night. They buried him by the river as he had requested, in a spot marked by a simple stone that bore his name and the words "beloved husband, father, and friend." The whole family gathered for the funeral, along with what remained of the old Panamint community and newer friends from the farms that had sprung up along the river. The preacher spoke about Flynn's life, his kindness and strength, and the love he had shown to everyone who knew him. But it was Nora who delivered the eulogy that mattered, standing beside her husband's grave with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around her. "Flynn Quentin saved my life 44 years ago," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "He jumped into a raging river to pull out a stranger, risking everything without a second thought. But that was just the beginning. He saved me every day after that too, with his love and his patience and his unwavering presence. He was the best man I ever knew, and I was blessed beyond measure to be his wife. He told me once that when I opened my eyes after he pulled me from the water, he knew his lonely days were over. Well, my darling Flynn, I want you to know that you ended my lonely days too. And even though you are gone now, I am not lonely, because you are still with me. You are in our children's faces, in our grandchildren's laughter, in every stone of this farm we built together. You will be with me until my last breath, and then I will join you, and we will be together again." She bent and placed a hand on the fresh earth covering his grave, then straightened and walked away, supported by her children. She did not look back. Flynn would not want her to dwell in the past. He would want her to keep living, to keep loving their family, to keep finding joy in each new day. And that was what Nora did. She lived on for another 8 years, still sharp-minded and surrounded by family. She spent her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories about Flynn and their life together, ensuring that the next generations would know where they came from and the love that had founded their family. She continued to teach occasionally, never quite able to give up her passion for education. She painted, she read, she tended her garden, and she walked down to the river almost every day to sit by Flynn's grave and talk to him about everything that was happening. In the fall of 1930, at the age of 77, Nora fell ill with pneumonia. She fought it for 2 weeks. Her family gathered around her bedside, but in the end, her body was simply too tired to keep fighting. On a cool October evening, with all 4 of her children holding her hands, Nora Brennan Quentin drew her last breath. Her final words were, "I see him. Flynn is waiting for me." They buried her beside Flynn, just as they had planned all those years ago, in matching graves overlooking the river that had brought them together. The double headstone they placed bore both their names and a single inscription, "Together always." The Quentin farm continued to thrive under Tommy's management, and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The house Flynn built with his own hands still stands beside the river, expanded and modernized, but fundamentally the same structure that sheltered a young family learning to build a life together. The land still produces crops and supports cattle, and the river still flows clear and cool through the desert, giving life to everything it touches. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets in shades of gold and the stars begin to emerge, people walking along that riverbank swear they can see 2 figures sitting together on the grass, hand in hand, watching the water flow past. They are just shadows, just tricks of the light, but those who see them always smile because they know the story. They know about the cowboy who jumped into a river to save a drowning girl, how she opened her eyes, and he knew his lonely days were finally over, and how they built a love that lasted beyond death itself. It is a story that has been passed down through 5 generations now, told and retold until it has become legend. But unlike most legends, every word is true. Flynn and Nora Quentin really lived, really loved, really built something lasting from tragedy and chance. Their descendants still live on that land, still farm those fields, still draw water from that river. And they all know that they owe everything to a moment of heroism 44 years before any of them were born, when a lonely cowboy saw someone in trouble and did not hesitate, did not think of the risk, just jumped. Because that is what love does. It jumps, it risks, it saves. And sometimes, If you are very lucky, it lasts forever.